Hello, everybody. It's time to get animating with CSS. Composited animations, old and new, and what it could mean for you. A talk by me, Morgan Murrah, today. Does your animation look uneven or glitchy when you want it to be smooth and glide along? Can we make smoother animations that use less resources from the main thread and are also better for performance? Sometimes, yes, we can. Today, in this talk, I'm going to be talking about how to approach making CSS animations with a thing called the Compositor. The Compositor has been around for a few years now, and some of the advice I'm giving today may be new to you or it might feel old. However, the Compositor continues to be updated in recent years, and we ought to take some notice. My name is Morgan Murrah, and I have been doing web development for approximately 9 years. In recent years, I have volunteered time at the W3C in a group called the Sustainable Web Interest Group. That group has a focus particularly to publish guidelines that organizations, teams, and individuals can use to learn from to make the web more sustainable for people and the planet. Those guidelines motivated me to make this talk today, and I hope it can motivate some of you as well. The main part of this talk today is a story of just one time that I put some CSS animations on my website that had unintended consequences, performance and environmental effects. My website is pictured to the right of this slide, and the current deployment of that website and some archival links to it are the main practical examples used in this talk. We are keeping it very small today about my website, just about 2 animations, which have been animated at one time or another. The sun in the top left with a laptop in it, and some clouds in the background that move. And we'll see about that in a second. First, I wanted to give a big thank you to PerformanceObserver for giving me this venue to present. Everyone should spread the good word about it. Thank you particularly to Sia and Estella for your efforts. You are real great community stars, and we're really great to have you both. Today's talk basically has a few signposts. There's an initial problem, which I'm going to describe, which I learned about, which I was kind of oblivious to and had to fix, and what I learned afterwards. And then I'm going to give you some advice about how this might help you too if you have to use CSS or want to use CSS to animate on your website. In the earlier version of my website, these 2 animations that I described earlier had unintended excessive activity on the main thread of the browser. You could potentially call this many things in common language, like noise, pollution, overburdening. The animations that I'd put on my website did extra stuff than what I really wanted, and someone noticed. It was actually Alex Russell, who knows a few things about web browsers, who noticed it in the performance tab and asked me about it on the web performance Slack group. After confirming what he said was correct, I realized my initial animations were not consistent with the sustainability advice that I was promoting myself. In my desire to be consistent, I began diving headfirst into the topic and learning a lot. But this was an after the fact exercise. In common language, after the fact experiences described, such as in this talk, are sometimes described as stepping on a foot gun. The web sustainability guidelines are significantly supportive of a theme of avoiding stepping on foot guns ahead of time and perhaps recovering from them when they happen. Sometimes it feels like a lot of web standards are all these stories that we can learn from that go hand in hand with increasing our goals, performing at our goals. We can accomplish a whole lot with a little strategy in mind. Maybe a little more upfront. Sometimes this is referred to as shifting things left in the process, but maybe just a little bit more thought is needed up front, and we can all do less work, and the machines can seem to do less work too. I definitely recommend checking out the Web Sustainability Guidelines when you get a chance. I want to quickly note that there are some things that this talk is not about. JavaScript animations are out there, such as libraries such as GSAP and others, hat tip to you all, and HTML animations, such as blinking marquees, but those aren't really in popular usage much anymore. They're kind of out of style. But the CSS animating is what we're talking about today. And also, before even continuing to talk about animating with CSS, I need to give a solid acknowledgement to accessibility, which should always be an important consideration when you're animating on the web. I'd go as far as to saying it's a prerequisite before you really get started at all. We should all be considering whether the animations we are working with or planning to use are actually desirable in the first place, depending on the context, such as what information is being conveyed. In the example that I'm talking about today, the two animations of the sun and the clouds are basically decorative and are not essential to convey information, but they are nice to have. Importantly, my strategy today is to make them optional. I suggest you should always strongly consider making animation optional or adjusted, such as with the prefers reduced motion CSS media query if there is motion involved. If that query is set to reduce, it can reduce the animation or prevent it, depending on how you configure it, with no detriment to anyone who has no preference and wants to see it. There is more about this in the topic and resources that I'm going to be sharing at the end of the talk. The current website uses this prefers reduced motion media query. I have also tried to avoid using big statistics in this talk to keep it very focused and small, but some of the animation architecture discussed in this talk affects billions of people and their devices and their web performance experiences. The sum of all these things would be quite big. It's kind of fun to just sit back and imagine it for a little bit. According to the Web Almanac, one big statistic, though, is that more than 40% of mobile and desktop pages have non-composited animations. At any rate, read more of that resource too, the Web Almanac. There's lots more data and detail in there. I myself continued to start very small. I wanted to just fix the problems that were on my website with the sun and the clouds. It's not every day that a major browser technologist like Alex Russell runs a sample on your website and lets you know how it could be measurably improved. That's a memorable learning opportunity if there ever was one. I have found out some things about the Compositor that I'm sharing with you today, but I don't know everything, of course. This presentation doesn't try and summarize the entire topic of graphics animations in the browser in 20 minutes. It just continues to tell a story about what CSS Compositor properties can mean for you and your animations, and hopefully give you some useful takeaways. So, there were obviously animators before the web. There's also a history of pre-web animation concepts that seem to have made it into the browser architecture itself. From old-fashioned animation techniques, there's a concept of layers that work independently to reduce the workload of animating, whether it was by hand originally or by machines in our examples. Layers can move, such as animations can move across a page. Layers can move and clip, such as scrolling on a mobile device, which is really sort of an animation that we just consider to be functionality in common language. And also there's things like pinch to zoom, which is sometimes called page scaling in the Chromium code. That involves using layers in the Compositor as well. It is helpful to consider just a simple traditional animation, such as a foreground picture of Bugs Bunny moving across a background of a desert. You can think of the cutouts of Bugs Bunny animated moving left or right, or up or down, across a static background of a desert that's just made once. This is a useful starting point to consider the power of layers. The Compositor promotes elements to layers and runs them independently of things that require the main thread, at least in my understanding. In this example, you might consider the desert as being like the main thread. It involves the whole screen, its entire width, a lot of things, potentially. Bugs Bunny is a composited layer running on top of it and along the desert layer. This analogy to traditional animation and compositing is made also by Steve Kobes 5 years ago in a great talk called Life of a Pixel, in which he gives a nod to these ancestors, the pre-web animation methods that seem to live on in the Compositor today. A close analogy to traditional animation is also made by Noam Rosenthal 8 years ago in a talk called Browser Graphics Under the Hood. In this screenshot, you can see him showing a Bugs Bunny or a bunny rabbit of some kind moving in and around some text to show layering. Both talks are extremely good and capture more about this topic than I can with you just today. Both emphasize how the Compositor, utilizing layers, used well, helps prioritize resources and puts things later in the rendering pipeline. It may take some dev work to set up these priorities, but they are ingredients for success. I really want to say a quick thank you for all the people that have put engineering into CSS and animations and browsers, people like Steve and Noam, for web developers like me to get to use. It's fun and it's always evolving. I'm going to focus continuing to talk through a practical example today, which I've decided not to live demo, but maybe we could live demo at the end. Um, is a practical example which I documented in my web performance calendar article. The article is called A Tale of Two Animations, the Compositor and the Skies. This is more or less the story of the foot gun that I've described that got me started on this whole journey. It details a very clear picture of a before and after description of a website after it was updated. And we can just go ahead and get right into those details. On my website, there were two animations, a pulsing sun and three moving clouds moving across the sky. How bright and optimistic. I coded these animations the old-fashioned way, with no generative tech, no chatbots or prompts. I didn't even really use any documentation either. Did I write it all myself? Well, not quite either. I was fearless. I had found some CSS that others had made, and I had copied it. I knew how some of it worked, but I had approached this very casually, since it was just my own website, and I wasn't thinking a great deal about it. It was almost a completely static website. This approach, the lax thought, the copying, partially sets us up to explain why this turned out to be a foot gun in the first place. You really got to watch out when you're copying or generating or whatever you're doing to really understand what you're putting on your users' devices. You really should be thinking about this, CPUs and GPUs and what they're doing. Until you get a wake-up call from someone like I did, you might not be meeting your own standards or goals that you aspire to, even for your small portfolio or your small projects. So let's just quickly consider those old examples of the animations and how they worked. I had found the animation of the sun from CodePen. I looked at it and I thought it was vibrant and subtle, and it used box shadow to animate the pulsing rays of the sun. It kind of looks like multiple layers visually, but it's not actually operating in that way. I found clouds from another project that I had worked on that are made, that I must give credit, by the way. They were drawn by illustrator Phoebe Wall, who's a cherished citizen of the Pacific Northwest where I live. And those clouds initially used a property called the left property to move the clouds horizontally. Basically, it was repainting on the screen. Despite the charm of those moving clouds and pulsing sun, there were performance issues. Dun, dun, dun. Have to give a shout out to the previous talk, feeling like Frankenstein is about to arrive. In some samples of the website that I took, the two animations were causing measurable painting and rendering time on the main thread. It seemed to be the same no matter how long I took the sample, because the animations were running over and over infinitely, which is not good either. I saw visually that they lit up the main thread. I showed the slide earlier of activity in the main thread that was noticeable to the eye. And I could see it, Alex saw it. It's not the biggest impact, but consistently before and after, I've noticed about a 2.5% impact difference in terms of savings of re-rendering and painting on the main thread. I'm here to say today that 2.5% savings is worth grabbing if it's in your grasp. Importantly, I would add that the website right now doesn't have a lot going on the main thread. It's mostly a static website. It's a bit of a clean slate. But if I added more activity to it, it could cause disruption that I could attribute to the code that I had just added, when it was really, if you consider it properly, I suggest, a defect in the way that I had animated the animation going on in the background. I did not realize it, but I had created a bottleneck for future growth, potentially a future headache, at least under the high standards that I was aspiring to. For the cloud animations, when I updated them, I used the translate X property instead of the left property to move the clouds horizontally. This allowed the browser to operate on its own layer because of the compositor. Easy enough? This is in line with over about 10 years of commentary on this topic, basically describing this approach with composited properties. The ancestor animators would be proud, as well as people who have been putting comments on places like CSS Tricks for like a decade. This advice basically holds pretty strong. By using Translate with the clouds, we were able to use composited properties that use less resources on the main thread. It's very similar to that example of Bugs Bunny moving across the screen, which is kind of why I suggest this already exists because it's very simple to understand. Uh, but box shadow, unfortunately, is not quite as easy to understand, it seems yet, because it is not a composited property. So I'm getting closer to wrapping up or getting closer to trying to give you some tips to take away today, because it's been a fascinating learning journey so far, and it was definitely a interesting response to a small website and getting some good feedback on it. So keep an eye out for changes. Clip path and background color are newer properties. Well, not newer properties, but they are newer to be composited and allow for new things to be possible. Some of you are probably very clever out there and can do a lot with clip path and background colors. Now, sometimes as a developer, you have to make specific decisions. Can I make it use a thing or can I not? We're going to spend a little bit of time just thinking about that in relation to these compositor-friendly properties. It might change how you reason about a position to a stakeholder, such as a product manager asking you to implement an animation or evaluate one. Let's look at the updated example a little bit more on my website that made things a little bit better. Let's also consider the compositor-friendly properties. There aren't that many of them, but they are powerful and allow a great variety of things to be done. But these are just approximately 9 out of 200 something plus CSS properties. The animation of the sun that was pulsing using box shadow did not survive. This is because box shadow is not currently a compositor-friendly property, as I learned. I mean, it was kind of a subtle animation. It kind of had looked like it had layers to it, but it was not being composited. It's possible there are other ways to achieve a near similar effect, such as with clip path, background colors. I found potential ways to do it with scaling. But these all involve time that I did not have. I had limited time and I had to make decisions. Someone here could probably do a great job of these animations, but it was not in my grasp. So the basic how-to to make a compositor-friendly animation is just to use the compositor-friendly browsers properties in the browser. Just a note that you can't use filter, for example, to filter properties that are not compositable, because it accepts, I guess you would call it an argument or value. I'm forgetting what the actual term is right there. But basically, browsers are pretty powerful about this. So there was some advice, and this is one of the things that I just see evolved over time. There was stronger advice in the past to use a property basically called will change to promote things to their own layers, kind of with a hint. Now, this basically seems to have been improved upon or incremented upon over time. And there doesn't seem to be, it's actually advised against basically in all instances. My web's not all instances, but unless you have a very specific use case for it. So these hints is an example of something that kind of comes at a bit of a cost. It's an extra piece of code. It's an extra piece of concept that someone might find in your code and then say, what is will change doing? Maybe it's needed. When actually the browsers are quite powerful now, and at least I have just taken it off my website, and the animation seems to work perfectly without the 2.5% cost thing that I had described earlier. Compositing can really help you with your animation performance and sustainability. If your goal is to have a leaner website and minimize your non-essential footprint, this is a solid path to consider using these properties. You might be setting yourself up for a bottleneck if you don't take extra care. So I wanted to just give it, I'll be posting these after the talk, but if you wanted to watch one single few lines of code to see where the direction is going, you can, for example, just check out some Chromium code comments and see what is the list, the definition of compositor-friendly properties. That has changed. It changed in 2025 to include clip path and it could change more in the future. Um, so you can do a lot with these things if you're clever. So let's start to continue to wrap up and kind of start to conclude. You can understand that there are compositor-friendly properties that work with layers to reduce the workload of certain things on the main thread. You can find resources, and my preferred one happens to be the Web Sustainability Guidelines, which all speak a broad message of avoiding overburdening your website. If you don't need to run it, or if it's not really adding value, should you be running it? Should you be adding it? I have tried to make a significant case today that I have some strategy involved with my simple website. You can use compositor-friendly properties today to animate and find the benefits measurable in the browser in certain experiments. Also, I wanted to just give a shout out because this really feels like a very friendly, good community atmosphere. And we basically a lot of us end up knowing each other very fast enough, interested in these topics, that we should just show support for the engineering that goes into these CSS animation tools and techniques so that they have a kind of at least an extra morale boost to continue making them better and continue working on these things. There were going to be more resources, information on my blog about this. And I am just about to wrap up in a second just to say again, thank you. Thank you to the organizers and thank you to everyone who's listened today. I'm hoping that we can reach a slightly broader audience with this, with the way that I framed this talk, and I look forward to sharing it afterwards, and thank you all.